Welcome back to the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Last time, Samuel finally ridded himself of a leaky ship and drunk crew, and was afterwards invited to be master of the Thetis to deliver cargo to the Caribbean islands. While waiting for orders, Samuel had a chance to witness people getting impressed or pushed into the naval service in Great Britain, which often caused riots and unrest. We find Samuel now getting ready to sail for Santo Domingo. On September 4th, the wind being at southeast, we sailed for Santo Domingo. My order was to endeavor to go through the North Channel to avoid French cruisers. During the night of the 5th, we had sometimes light airs and calm, and at other times strong gales, which brought us under double-reefed topsails, the weather being foggy. But when it cleared a little, we found ourselves to the southwards of the Isle of Man. On the 6th, the wind being to the northward of east, I gave up my attempt for the North Channel and ran to the southward. The 7th, at 3 a.m., we passed the small light with a strong breeze at east-northeast. The 14th, we had a fresh gale from the westward with heavy squalls and rain. And the following day being rough, we struck top-gallant masts and ran in the jib boom. The 16th, we split our fore-topmast staysail and bent another. The 18th, the wind continued rough from the westward. From the 18th to the 28th, we had much contrary winds and unpleasant weather. On the latter day, we spoke the brig Mayflower of and for Newcastle on Tyne from Jamaica, about 9 weeks, having carried away the head of her main mast. At 8 a.m. the wind shifted suddenly to the westward, when a wave burst in our cabin window, though they were highly situated, and the water did much damage in the cabin. For a few days after this we had moderate weather with a fair wind. On the 4th of October we saw a brig in the southern quarter which gave us chase, but in about an hour after she stood to the eastward. The 5th being in the latitude of 37 degrees 59 minutes north and longitude 43 degrees 46 minutes west, we saw 2 tropical birds, which generally frequent the torrid zone. They are white, about the size of a gull, and have a long tail terminating in a point, with some red between their eyes and bill. One of this species examined me very closely when I was a boy at the masthead of one of the West India packets, but they are generally shy. On the 6th of October we began to see flying fish, having crossed the Azores to the westward to avoid the French cruisers. On the 7th we got amongst the Saragossa weeds streaming southeast and northwest. On the evening of the 8th, a flying fish fell on board. They are much like a mullet about the head, with long fins or wings from their shoulders, which they spread on rising from the sea. They eat much like a whiting. They are caught in nets by the fishermen at Barbados and are brought in the morning alongside shipping, ready fried by the huckster women. This day we spoke a brig from Charleston for Gibraltar, about 22 days. The 11th of October, the wind being westerly and fresh, we began to experience heavy dews at night, and though the sun shined warm and bright through the day, the ship was very damp, and we found it difficult to keep our iron and steel things from rusting. This day a large shark, several dolphins, and old wives were playing about our vessel. The 13th, finding we were got into fine, warm weather, we bent the oldest of our sails. The 14th, we began to experience a regular trade wind from the southeast, being in the latitude of 30 degrees 41 minutes north. The sea was now covered with Saragossa weeds in an irregular manner. Finding our shrouds getting slack, we set them up this day. The 15th, we saw few weeds, and 'tis difficult to determine where the Saragossa weeds originally grew, but I think they either come from the African coast or Cape de Verde Islands, as they are to be seen less or more through the limits of the easterly trade winds. This day we caught a dolphin measuring 4 feet 2 inches long, and after being gutted weighed 25 pounds and a half. The following day we caught another weighing 10 pounds. When these fish are seen swimming in the water, their color is green and brown. When they are caught and hauled in, they are yellow like turmeric. When laying on the deck, they tremble much, and their color changes frequently from a silver to a pink, yellow, and crimson, and I have seen their flesh trembling long after being gutted. The 17th, we had much lightning around the compass with heavy rain. The 19th, we had a great swell from the northward, which made the vessel roll so deep into the water as to oblige us to take in our lower studding sail. The 20th, we had variable winds with heavy squalls, rain and thunder and lightning, a large whale keeping us company. The 22nd, the wind was variable, and at 2 p.m., after a storm had been brooding for some hours in the northern quarter under a dismal black sky, it came on with fury, bringing with it thunder, lightning, and rain. To prepare for the worst, I got the sails clewed up and as it cleared away we saw a schooner standing to the southward, and afterwards saw 2 other vessels standing the same way. This day the weed streamed east and west. I had made up my mind not to make Turk's Island, as is customary with British vessels, intending to run to the northward of Puerto Rico, but to run down to the southward of the Plate Reef, or Silver Keys, so called from a Spanish ship with silver on board being wrecked on it. It is the easterly bank, or rocky shoal, of the Bahama Isles, and through this passage the French ships bound to Cape Francois often run. Had I run for the Turk's Island passage, I must have laid to during the night, but by making my passage sure, I could run through the Plate Wreck passage all night. I think it would be a great acquisition if the British government would cause a lighthouse to be erected on the northwest point of the Turk's Island, which would in great measure ensure the safety of vessels running at night for that passage. But I think it would be also requisite that the light should be reverberating to distinguish it from other lights made by the Bahama vessels that lurk about these islands to decoy and mislead the unwary. Few vessels, I believe, would object to pay for the support of it, and it would be highly advantageous to the Americans bound for Cuba, Hispaniola, and Jamaica. For want of such light, many vessels get to leeward, and sometimes run on the island of Grand Caicos. The 23rd we had our cables on deck to clean and scrub. The 24th the wind was light, and we saw much lightning in the eastern quarter. The 25th we saw large beds of weeds. The weather was now very warm and sultry, and the ship had much long marine grass growing about the watermark. The 30th hoisted out our boat to scrub the bends and scrape off the grass. Several dolphins were sporting about, one of which I struck with a barbed instrument of 5 prongs, known by the name of the grains, but it afterwards, in struggling, got away, and during the afternoon kept close to the edge of the water, as if unable to sink deeper. The 31st of October we caught a small shark, and, as sailors are fond of variety, they made a mess of it. This day the wind was light and the weather warm and cloudy. On the 1st of November, under a supposition that I was drawing near Hispaniola, I ordered the cables to be bent. The 3rd we had strong breezes, and towards sunset I thought it prudent to take in all our studding sails, to prepare for falling in with the land. But as Mr. Self-Sufficiency's, my mate's, reckoning was not near out, his countenance exhibited a wise, or rather contemptuous grin, which I had often noticed during this passage, when his opinion differed from mine. About an hour before daylight, according to my instructions given on my retiring to rest, the mate came below and informed me that the land was bold on the larboard bow. I immediately ran on deck, and found it was 3 or 4 leagues from us, and after the day broke, I found it was near old Cape Francois in Hispaniola, this being the island where the famous Christopher Columbus established his first colony, and where the Spaniards afterwards hunted the inoffensive natives, driving them into the thickest forests, where they were shot at like animals or devoured by dogs, and it is supposed that in a few years between 2 and 3 million of the inhabitants were destroyed. The 4th of November, with a fresh breeze at northeast, we were running down the island nearly abreast of Monte Cristo, when suddenly we discovered a sloop lying ahull, or a ship stripped to her hull under her bare poles, which is a favorite trick with privateers to render themselves less visible. Under a supposition that she might be an enemy, as there was no chance of our dull sailing vessel escaping, I ordered the helmsman to steer directly for her, and asked the crew if they would stand by me to engage her if necessary. They replied in the affirmative, and 1 or 2 said they would much rather die than be confined in a French prison in this unhealthy climate. The sloop now set her foresail to endeavor to get a sight of our broadside, which I endeavored to prevent. It was now near sunset, and we perceived the sloop had 12 guns, whilst our number was only 6 guns and 6 swivels. An English ensign was now hoisted at her masthead, and she fired a gun to leeward. We soon ran alongside her, and found her name to be the Bermuda, from Bermuda on a cruise. The captain requested I would visit him. Accordingly, we tossed out our boat, and I went on board and was not a little surprised on going alongside to see such heavy guns as she had on board. Her deck was also well crowded with stout, able men, many of which were people of color. The master was an elderly man apparently well calculated for his employment, and seemed possessed of great vivacity. He informed me that at first sight he took our ship for a French sloop of war that had been some time cruising in the Mona Passage, but that our ship had taken a sheer, by which means he had discovered our force, which must have happened while I went below to get some musketoons out of the arm chest, having been very careful whilst on deck to keep the ship right end on to the privateer. He advised me by all means to keep a sharp lookout as we approached Port-au-Paix, as there were many small brigand privateers within the island of Fortunatus. He also gave me to understand that St. Mark's was again fallen into the hands of the brigands. The captain was desirous of having some potatoes. I therefore sent him a bucketful, and having hoisted in our boat, we made sail about an hour after dark to the westward. Having a piece of fur bulk on board, I ordered the carpenter the next morning to turn to and expedite his work in making 8 wooden guns. The seamen I employed in making and painting cloths to spread fore and aft as bulwarks, so that by sunset we had made great progress in showing 14 guns with the crew covered from sight in a great measure, as it was not prudent to expose the miniature band of warriors, consisting in all of 13 persons, 4 of which were boys, and 2 of the men were lame. The 5th of November the wind was light from the northwards at 3 p.m. We caught a shovel-nosed shark, which was dressed and partly ate by the crew. At 6 p.m. we saw a vessel in shore near Cape Francois, which I imagine was a British frigate. At 6 a.m. we were abreast of the west end of the island of Fortunatus, but saw none of the privateers from Port-au-Paix. At meridian we were in sight of the tableland of Cape Nicola. On the 6th at 5 p.m. we saw 2 schooners beating towards the Bahama Keys. At 6 we shorted sail in sight of the British men-of-war laying in the mole, as there was no probability of working up to the anchorage during the night. After dark we caught a barracuda with our fishing line and dressed it for supper, with silver boiled with it to ascertain whether it was poisonous, which is often the case with many fishes in this part of the world. The silver proving bright on trial, we ventured to eat the fish, the flesh of which was white and firm. Round the island of Hispaniola are a great number of web-footed birds, known by the name of noddies. They approach on the side of a thrush and are dark gray or sable color, but the top of their heads are white. These birds generally fly on board at night, and as soon as they find firm footing compose themselves to sleep and are caught by the boys, but do not live long, as I never found one that would eat after being caught. About 8 o'clock in the morning of the 6th we entered the mole with a light breeze, which soon after increased to a fresh gale blowing right out, and though it was desirable to reduce our sails, we had no opportunity, but were under the necessity of carrying a press of sail to work up to the town. About 10 o'clock a boat from the Belliquet came alongside, and soon after a boat from the Intrepid boarded us. A licensed pilot then came with his boat, so that we had 3 boats to drag along. Both lieutenants expressed their astonishment that our topmasts did not go over the side, but they held good. We had now got abreast of the town point, and expected in a board or 2 more to fetch the anchorage. In standing towards the town we attempted to tack, when the ship missed stays and was so near the beach in veering that she turned up the sand after her. Our pilot immediately requested me to anchor before the vessel drifted off the bank. We let go the anchor as fast as possible, and veered away a great part of the cable without bringing the ship up. We were therefore obliged to let go the best bower which secured her. Being well aware I was now in the Lion's Mouth, I paid the lieutenants great attention, and the Intrepid's boat soon after left us. The other lieutenant informed me that he was under the necessity of taking 1 seaman from me, and left it to me to say which he should take. Finding I could not divert him from his object, I gave him one who had given me much trouble. After dinner, some British gentlemen from town visited us, from whom I got a poor account of my future prospects. I found the garrison was feeble and the inhabitants of Cape Nicola sickly, the hospital being well filled with soldiers and seamen. After breakfast, I landed to pay my respects where required. I found it requisite to call on the public officers of the old French government assembled in a kind of courthouse in a large open square in the center of the town. From thence I was directed to the dwelling of the British governor or commandant of the garrison, whom I found reclining on a mattress near an open window, out of which he answered applicants, but I was admitted to seat within, near his bedside. My own private adventure mostly consisted of cheese, potatoes, onions, and bottled porter, a great part of which I disposed of. The day after my arrival, one of the army surgeons, in hopes of private practice, introduced himself to me on board, and I had occasion for his services, as 2 or 3 of my men were attacked by sickness. Having occasion to visit this surgeon one morning at the hospital, I perceived a hoop with a net under it, suspended by a rope from the rafters, which he informed me was for securing his provisions from the ants. To prevent their descent on the rope, it was either tarred or anointed with some defensive composition. One morning, early, having sent my men to fill water, before the stream was distributed by the inhabitants, one of the Beloquet officers thought proper to plunder me of another seaman, though I had 2 more ill on board at the time, which reduced my seamen to 3, besides boys. About this time a ship arrived here from Liverpool, the master of which I had known in the Mediterranean. The captain, being drunk a night or 2 after his arrival, quarreled with his cook, and seeing a naval lieutenant on the beach, requested him to take away the man. As our ships lay near each other, and witnessing the folly of the master, I exerted my influence to divert the officer from his game, stating the distressed state of the ship, and hoped he would not take advantage of a drunken man, who had not his wits to be aware of what trouble he was bringing on himself. On the other hand, the lieutenant wanted men to recruit the losses by death, and was not easily persuaded to give up the cook. However, I at last got the lieutenant on board my ship to take some refreshments, and the poor cook escaped. The captain fell at Port-au-Prince by the fever. From the time of my arrival, 2 gentlemen here had paid me great attention, at whose tables I frequently dined. One was a merchant of the name of Brandy, belonging to the house of Brandy and Dubourg. This Mr. B recommended me to take bitters to fortify my stomach against the prevailing sickness, and also requested that I would call daily about 11 o'clock at his dwelling for that purpose. The other gentleman was the naval contractor, who purchased some of my goods. His house lay at the east end of the town, to which I was going one day under the burning rays of a meridian sun. To cut short the distance, I quitted the path, and was proceeding over a patch of grass, which concealed a great number of hornets or black bees that had burrowed in the earth. These insects, not being accustomed to be disturbed by the foot of a man, instantly quitted their strongholds and attacked me with the greatest fury, one of which stung me violently under the eye, the pain of which was so acute that I hardly knew what to do. However, I left the grass as fast as possible, and on my arrival at the house washed the swelling part with rum, but the pain continued. At this place I had the opportunity of being in company with a man who once held the office of Governor Port-au-Prince, but alas, no vesture of his former grandeur remained save his gold-headed cane. He now held an army commission under the British government for a maintenance. One day, at the request of the commandant, I paid him a visit, he being in want of some articles. I found several army officers in the breakfast room discoursing on the hazardous excursion of the governor, who had just returned from a long ride without the lines to endeavor to discover the brigands, and I imagine from the subject on the carpet, no officer of the garrison but himself would have ventured 500 yards without the advanced post, on any consideration whatever. I think the only 2 roads from the town proceeded from its 2 ends. Each of these passes were flanked by the guns of a line of battleship, and these men of war were the only protection to be depended on, as I imagine the garrison did not exceed 200 men, many of which were in sickly circumstances. After being a week in the mole, during which time I had made little progress in sales, I made up my mind to hasten to Kingston in hope of obtaining some remnants of the last crop. The town of Cape Nicola is built on the south side of the mole, about 3 or 4 miles from its entrance, on a low, flat plain projecting into the mole, apparently made of ground. On the low, sandy west point is a fort adjoining the corner of the public square, where most of the principal inhabitants reside. This square has several walks in it and many trees, though not sufficient to shelter from the sun. A sluggish stream of drinkable water runs through this square. The houses consist of a ground floor only, which is divided into several apartments, but how the French residents found means of subsistence I know not, as there was little appearance of business going forward. On clearing at the custom house, I perceived a charge of $10 for the fort, a certificate of which was given me. Taking this document as a clearance to pass the lower fort, I repaired there and lodged with a subaltern. Towards evening I waited on the commandant to inform him of my departure, and to make a tender of my service for Jamaica. I found him and a captain of the Navy seated at their wine, and a chair being provided for me, I was requested to partake. The commandant having promised to forward his dispatches, I retired, and as I was going to the eastward, an army officer accosted me, saying that I had done wrong in depositing the paper at the lower battery, and that it was necessary for me now to visit the eastern fort. I accordingly proceeded thither, where a further demand of $10 was made on me as a fee to this fort. I hope you enjoyed this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly. please like, subscribe, and follow on whatever platform you're listening. Be sure to check out the description to find out more ways you can support this project and others. And tune in next time for more from the Journal of Samuel Kelly.